In the golden heart of Shira, a city perched where savannah met ancient forest, where red clay homes clustered around wells older than memory, and where the marketplace sang with 1,000 voices bargaining over spices, cloth, and clay pots, two girls named Amina and Leah were known throughout every neighborhood as the truest embodiment of friendship. Their story began in the dust and laughter of early childhood, but it would become the city's most powerful legend of trust, betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption. Amina was born on a night when the full moon hung low and enormous over Shira's rooftops, casting silver light across the celebration of her arrival. Her mother, Malfadima, a woman whose kindness was as legendary as her cooking, ran a soup kitchen that fed anyone who knocked, widow, orphan, traveler, or thief. Her father, Baba Kwame, was a carpenter whose skilled hands could coax beauty from rough wood, building everything from wedding chairs to coffins with equal care and devotion. The family lived modestly in a home filled with love, laughter, and an open-door policy that meant children from across the neighborhood treated their courtyard like a second home. Leah entered the world 3 months later during the rainy season, her first cries mingling with the drumming of water on tin roofs. Her mother, Samira, was a widow who supported 3 children through her extraordinary talent as a seamstress. Her fingers could dance across fabric, creating patterns that told stories of Shira's history in thread and color. Leah's older brother Malik dreamed of becoming a teacher, while her younger sister Zara followed Leah everywhere like a devoted shadow. The family's home was smaller, quieter, but filled with the determined resilience of those who survived through skill, hard work, and fierce love for one another. The girls met at the community well when they were barely old enough to carry small water jugs without spilling. Amina, always confident and outgoing, noticed Leah struggling with a jug too heavy for her small arms and immediately rushed to help. "My mama says, if we don't help each other, the well runs dry for everyone," Amina had said with the solemn wisdom of a fighter. Leah, relieved and grateful, smiled for the first time that day. From that moment, their lives intertwined like the roots of the great baobab tree that stood in the city center. As children, they were inseparable. They attended the same dusty schoolroom where Malam Ibrahim, ancient and patient, taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and the moral lessons of their ancestors. They sold goods side by side at their family's market stalls, Amina hawking her mother's prepared meals while Leah displayed her mother's embroidered cloths. They climbed the tallest mango trees to steal fruit, getting matching scars on their knees when they inevitably fell. They washed clothes together at the river, singing old songs their grandmothers had taught them, their voices harmonizing naturally. On festival nights, they danced until exhaustion, then collapsed on Amina's flat rooftop to watch stars wheel overhead while sharing their deepest dreams and most secret fears. "I'm going to travel the world someday," Amina would whisper, her eyes reflecting starlights. "I'll see oceans and mountains and cities so big you couldn't walk across them in a single day. I'm going to build something that lasts," Leah would respond, her voice thoughtful and determined. "Something that makes people remember that I existed, that I mattered, that I wasn't just invisible." These childhood promises were made with the absolute certainty that only children possess, the belief that friendship can survive anything, that promises once spoken are unbreakable, and that the future stretches endlessly before you with infinite possibility. As they transitioned into adolescence, subtle changes began to reshape their relationship. Amina blossomed into a young woman whose natural warmth and charisma drew people like moths to flame. She had inherited her mother's generous spirit and her father's steady wisdom, creating a combination that made her beloved throughout Shira. When younger children needed help with school, they sought Amina. When neighbors quarreled over property lines or borrowed tools, they asked Amina to mediate. When the city organized festivals or community projects, Amina's name was always mentioned first. As someone whose involvement guaranteed success, Leah, meanwhile, grew into a young woman of sharp intelligence and quiet determination. She excelled in mathematics and could solve problems that baffled her teachers. She read every book she could borrow or trade for, hungry for knowledge that might lift her family from their precarious financial position. She helped her mother with increasingly complex sewing commissions, her skilled fingers learning to create beauty from simple materials. Yet despite her considerable talents and contributions, Leah often felt like she existed in Amina's shadow. Valued, yes, but always as Amina's brilliant friend, rather than as Leah remarkable in her own right. This feeling intensified as they approached their 5th-10th year. During the school's annual academic competition, Leah scored the highest marks in mathematics and literature, achievements that should have brought recognition and praise. Yet when the results were announced, the first question everyone asked was, "Where's Amina?" Did she compete? The focus immediately shifted to Amina's performance in public speaking and leadership, overshadowing Leah's academic triumph. Leia smiled and congratulated her friend genuinely. But alone in her room that night, she allowed herself to cry tears of frustration and bitter disappointment. Ma Samira, noticing her daughter's distress, sat beside her on the sleeping mat and spoke with the wisdom earned through years of hardship. My daughter, comparison is a thief that steals joy. Amina's light doesn't diminish yours. The sky has room for countless stars, each brilliant in their own way. But these words, though well-meaning, couldn't completely soothe the ache of feeling perpetually overlooked. The friendship itself remained strong on the surface, but tiny cracks had begun to form, invisible fault lines that would prove vulnerable when pressure was applied. That year brought extraordinary harvest and wealth to Shira. The city council decided to celebrate with a festival unlike any in living memory. A full week of drumming, dancing, feasting, and entertainment, with invitations extended to dignitaries and merchants from distant cities. Preparations consumed the entire community for months. Into this atmosphere of excited anticipation arrived Mr. Adil, a man whose very presence seemed to promise transformation. He was perhaps 35 years old, dressed in clothing that spoke of wealth and sophistication from the capital city, and he carried himself with the confident ease of someone accustomed to influence and authority. He claimed to represent a charitable foundation dedicated to identifying talented youth from smaller cities and providing them with opportunities, scholarships to prestigious universities, apprenticeships with successful businesses, connections to powerful people who could open doors. Mr. Adil was persuasive and came bearing immediate generosity. He donated a significant sum to repair the school's roof, provided new textbooks for students, and hosted a lavish feast for the city's poorest families. Criticism melted away under the warmth of his apparent benevolence. During the festival's opening ceremonies, Mr. Adil delivered a speech that captivated the assembled crowd. I grew up in a city much like Shira, he told them, his voice carrying across the square with practiced eloquence. I know what it means to have talent, ambition, and intelligence, but lack opportunity. Your children, your brilliant, deserving children, shouldn't have their futures limited by the accident of where they were born. I'm here to change that. The crowd erupted in applause, parents imagining their children studying in distant universities, returning as doctors, lawyers, engineers, and teachers. Amina threw herself into the festival with characteristic enthusiasm, organizing children's games, leading singing groups, helping serve food at community meals, her laughter carrying across the square. Mr. Adil noticed her. Of course, everyone noticed Amina and commented on her obvious leadership qualities. But it was Leia who truly caught his calculating attention. During a public discussion about the city's needs, Leia spoke with unusual eloquence and insight about practical improvements, better water management, expanded schooling for girls, establishment of a lending library, creation of apprenticeship programs for dyeing crafts. Her vision was specific, thoughtful, and demonstrated deep understanding of Shira's actual needs rather than superficial desires. After the meeting, Mr. Adil approached Leia directly. You have a remarkable mind, he told her. His smile warm and his attention focused entirely on her in a way that made her feel seen and valued as never before. I'd like to hear more of your ideas. Would you join me for tea tomorrow? Leia's heart soared. For the first time in her life, someone important, someone from outside, someone who could offer real opportunities, had chosen her first, had seen her value before considering Amina. The tea meeting led to another, then regular afternoon conversations, then invitations to small gatherings with other selected youth and city leaders. Mr. Adil was masterful in his manipulation. He never asked for anything directly, never made explicit demands, but instead created an atmosphere where Leia felt compelled to prove herself worthy of his attention and investment. He would casually mention challenges his foundation faced. It's so difficult to know who truly needs help versus who simply wants an easy path. If only I had someone with real insight into this community, someone brave enough to tell uncomfortable truths. Leia, desperate to demonstrate her value and secure the opportunities he dangled. Scholarship applications, letters of introduction, mentions of internships in the capital began to speak more freely than wisdom should allow. At first, it was general information. Which families were truly struggling versus those who merely appeared poor. Which young people were genuinely studious versus those who simply performed well in public. But Mr. Adil's questions grew more specific, more personal, always framed as concern and desire to help effectively. Tell me about Amina, he said during one conversation. She seems beloved by everyone. But surely beneath that perfect exterior there are challenges. How can I help her if I don't understand the full picture? Leia, in a moment she would replay with agonizing regret thousands of times, began to talk. She told him about Amina's family's recent financial struggles, how Baba Kwama's hands had developed tremors that made precise carpentry work increasingly difficult, how the family had too much pride to ask for help publicly, how they sometimes went to bed hungry rather than reduce portions at the soup kitchen. She shared Amina's private fear that she wasn't intelligent enough for university, her worry that her popularity was superficial and people would abandon her if she ever truly needed them. She revealed Amina's complicated relationship with a young man named Yusuf, whose family had rejected a potential match due to financial incompatibility. With each revelation, Mr. Adil nodded thoughtfully, praised Leia's insight and honesty, and rewarded her with gifts: a beautiful notebook bound in leather, a fountain pen from the capital, a silk scarf that felt like water between her fingers, and most intoxicating of all, promises of future opportunities that grew more specific and tantalizing with each meeting. Leia rationalized her actions through increasingly desperate mental gymnastics. She told herself she was helping, that by giving Mr. Adil complete information, she was ensuring that when help came, it would reach the right people in the right ways. She convinced herself that Amina would understand that these weren't truly betrayals, but rather strategic disclosures that would ultimately benefit everyone. The consequences rippled through Shira like stones thrown into still water, creating expanding circles of damage. Amina first noticed something wrong during a normal day at the market when a merchant she'd known since childhood approached her with unexpected pity. "How is your father's health, dear?" the woman asked, with sympathetic tone. "Someone told me his hands have gotten so bad he can barely work. You must be frightened about your family's future." Amina, stunned and confused, stammered something non-committal and hurried away. Over following days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Classmates offered unsolicited sympathy about her secret heartbreak over Yusuf. Teachers suggested she consider vocational training rather than academic preparation, saying kindly that not everyone is meant for university. And there's no shame in knowing your limitations. Neighbors began leaving anonymous food donations on their doorstep, causing Mafadima deep embarrassment. Amina felt like her skin had been peeled away, leaving her raw and exposed. The private struggles she had shared only with her dearest friend, the doubts she whispered at midnight, the fears she had confessed through tears, had somehow become public knowledge, transformed into gossip and pity. The realization of the source was gradual but inevitable. Only Leia knew everything, down to the smallest details, now circulating through the city. The confrontation happened beneath their fig tree on an evening when the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Leia arrived first, having been summoned by a note that simply said, "We need to talk." She knew immediately that her betrayal had been discovered. Amina approached slowly, her usually bright face shadowed with pain. "Tell me honestly," she said without preamble, her voice shaking but controlled. "Did you tell people about my father? About Yusuf? About my fears regarding school?" Looking into Amina's eyes, those eyes that had shared 1,000 secrets, witnessed 1,000 moments, reflected a decade of friendship, Leia couldn't compound betrayal with lies. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But, Amina, I never meant to hurt you. I thought Mr. Adil said he could help if he understood the truth." "Helping?" Amina's voice cracked with pain and anger. "You turned my pain into currency. You bought his attention with my secrets. How is that helping? All my life, I've been in your shadow." Leia struggled to explain the desperate hunger for recognition that had driven her actions. "Everyone loves you. Everyone chooses you. Everyone sees you first. For once, someone important saw me. For once, I was the special one. And I thought if I proved my value to him, maybe I could finally matter, could become important by making me small." Amina interrupted, her voice carrying an edge of anger beneath the hurt. "Could rise by pushing me down. That's not friendship, Leia. That's not love. That's betrayal in its ugliest form." The conversation that followed was long, painful, and ultimately unresolved. Leia apologized repeatedly, her genuine remorse warring with defensive justifications. Amina cycled through anger, hurt, confusion, and ultimately a grief that felt like death. Because in a very real sense, something had died that evening beneath the fig tree. Their friendship, as it had existed since childhood, was over. They parted with Amina's final words hanging in the air between them. "I do want to know if I can forgive this. Leia, I want to, because I remember who we used to be. But I don't know if that girl, the friend I loved, even exists anymore, and I don't know if I can trust whatever's left. The following weeks were torturous for both girls. Amina withdrew into her family and a smaller circle of friends she felt she could still trust. She threw herself into helping at the soup kitchen with renewed intensity, finding some solace in serving others who were struggling. Leah discovered that her Pyrrhic victory tasted like ashes. Mr. Adele continued to meet with her, but his warmth had cooled noticeably. The promised scholarship application forms never materialized. The specific internship programs he'd mentioned became vague and distant. When Leah worked up courage to ask directly about timelines, he would pat her hand condescendingly and say things like, "These things take time, my dear. Patience is a virtue." She began to realize with growing horror that she had been manipulated by a master who had exploited her insecurity and ambition for his own purposes. Those purposes became clearer when Mr. Adil presented a proposal to the city council, a complete restructuring of Shira's traditional leadership and economic systems, with himself positioned as an advisor with significant authority over resource allocation and decision. He used information gathered from his conversations with Leah and others, knowledge of family feuds, financial vulnerabilities, personal secrets, to pressure council members towards supporting his plan. Malam Ibrahim, the wise old teacher, stood during the heated council meeting and spoke with quiet but unmistakable authority. "This man has collected our secrets like a hunter collects traps. He has turned our children into informants and our community's trust into his personal weapon. I say we reject his proposal entirely and ask him to leave our city." The room erupted in debate, some council members having been compromised by Mr. Adil's knowledge of their vulnerabilities. In this atmosphere of tension and recrimination, Leah finally understood the full weight of what she had done. She hadn't merely betrayed Amina. She had helped an outsider weaponize her entire community's trust and openness. The shame was crushing. Ma Samira, watching her daughters collapse with a mother's aching heart, sat her down for a difficult conversation. "What have you done, my daughter?" Leah confessed everything, every conversation with Mr. Adil, every secret shared, every justification she had constructed. Ma Samira listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly sorrowful. "There is a story the old ones tell," Ma Samira finally said, "about a young woman who sold a village's sacred spring to a stranger for the promise of gold. The stranger bottled the water and sold it back to the villagers at prices they couldn't afford. The young woman received her gold, but her people died of thirst. And she lived the rest of her life wealthy but alone, surrounded by riches but starved of love and community." Do you understand this story? Leah understood completely. She had sold something precious and irreplaceable for promises that had turned out to be worthless. During an emergency evening meeting, Leah asked permission to speak. "Mr. Adil's knowledge came partly from me," she confessed, voice trembling. "He asked me to share information, and I did, because I wanted opportunities and recognition. I was wrong. I betrayed Amina. I betrayed all of you. His promises are empty." The room erupted in shock. Mr. Adil tried to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. The council voted unanimously to reject his proposal and request his departure. His brief presence would be remembered as a lesson about trading community trust for individual advancement. Leah's confession earned no immediate forgiveness. Families refused to speak to her. Customers avoided her mother's stall, and her sister faced teasing. Masamira stood by her daughter. "You made terrible mistakes, but you had courage to admit them. Now comes the hard part, earning back trust." Leah threw herself into service, working harder than ever, volunteering for exhausting community projects, offering free tutoring. Slowly, attitudes began to soften. 6 months later, Amina approached Leah at the well. "I'm choosing to forgive you," she said. "Not for your sake, but for mine. What you did still hurts, and I'm not sure our friendship can ever be what it was. But I release you from the debt," Leah responded through tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I accept it gratefully. That friendship was built by children who didn't understand how precious trust is. Maybe someday we can build something new." Rebuilding trust was slow and painful. They started with small, neutral interactions at community events. A crisis accelerated their reconciliation when a market fire threatened Masamira's stall. Working side by side to fight flames, exhausted and smoke-stained, they cried together over their relief. As they sat surrounded by ash, Leah mentioned knowing about Amina's mother's destroyed spices. Amina was surprised she remembered such details. The fact that Leah still paid attention because she cared cracked open the door between them. They began meeting for tea, worked together, organizing a fundraiser. Discovering their combined talents created something more effective than either could achieve alone. This new friendship wasn't the uncomplicated bond of childhood, but in some ways it was deeper, precisely because it was chosen rather than assumed. Years passed. Both women became respected in Shira. Amina became a teacher specializing in emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Leah established a lending library and taught workshops on critical thinking and manipulation awareness, using her painful experience as cautionary tale. They developed a tradition of speaking together at annual harvest festivals, telling their full story. During one memorable speech when both were in their 30s, Leah said, "We tell children, everyone makes mistakes. But we don't prepare them for the reality that some mistakes have consequences lasting years. I spent a decade earning back trust. I destroyed in moments." Amina followed. Forgiveness isn't weakness or pretending harm didn't happen. It's consciously choosing to stop carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. But forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive and still protect yourself. The fig tree, where they decarved initials as children, now stood surrounded by a garden they deplanted together, with plaques displaying sayings, "Trust is built slowly but destroyed quickly. Ambition without wisdom leads to actions you'll spend years regretting." Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. On a cool evening when both were in their 50s, they sat beneath the ancient fig tree watching grandchildren play. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't told the truth?" Leah asked. Amina considered seriously. The truth always comes out. If it had come out later, it might have destroyed even the possibility of what we have now. The pain was terrible, but the honesty gave us something to work with. As sunset came and families gathered children, they walked back into the city side by side, not holding hands as children, but with comfortable proximity of two people who knew each other's worst moments and chose to keep showing up. Behind them, the fig tree stood witness its bark carrying not just their initials, but names of dozens of other friendships carved by people who heard their story and wanted to make promises about the kind of friends they would strive to be. The story became a living thing in Shira, told differently, depending on who spoke, but always carrying the same core truth. Friendship is both stronger and more fragile than we imagine, and the work of being human involves constantly choosing between our worst and best impulses. Two women who once thought their friendship was too strong to break now rested knowing what they built from its brokenness was perhaps more valuable than the innocent thing they lost, forged in fire, tested by time, and proved through the daily choice to show up with honesty even when painful.